I'm Alan Kozin, and welcome to Things We Said Today, our weekly show about all things Beatles, their past, present, anything we can find out about the future. And actually, this week we may have something about something in the future. I'm joined by my regular co-hosts, Ken Michaels, who you know is the host of the syndicated radio show Every Little Thing. Hello, Ken.
Hi, Alan. Hi, everybody.
And Steve Marinucci, whose work you know from Examiner.com as the Beatles Examiner, the Monkees Examiner, and many other sorts of examiners. Hello, Steve.
Hello, Alan. Hello, everyone.
And Al Sussman, a longtime contributor and, in fact, executive editor of Beatle Fan magazine. Hello, Al.
Hi, Alan. Hello there, everybody.
Okay, so this week we have a fairly newsy show because in the week that has elapsed since we last gathered, lots of stuff has happened. And so, I mean, bizarrely enough, last week we had a topic that we never got to because there was so much in the news to talk about that by the time we got to the end of that, the show was over. And I think this week the same thing will happen because the list is even longer and begins with the announcement today, as we record the show, of 8 Days a Week, Ron Howard's film about the Beatles' touring years. Apple announced that the film today would be, let me see, first it would be shown theatrically in September and then immediately go to Hulu for streaming. And they released a 50-second trailer that showed a little bit of what the film's going to be about. And it has caused an uproar, naturally, among Beatle fans on the internet, on Facebook, and generally around. And so it obviously falls to us to discuss what it all means. So Steve, you've reported on it in your examining. Why don't you tell us what it all means from your point of view?
Well, most of the details we already knew. Obviously, the big thing is that it's going to come to America on the 16th of September. And then I think it's the next day it'll show up on Hulu, which, for those who don't know, Hulu is not really the streaming outlet I would have chosen because Hulu has commercials, and the thought of that thing having commercials in between it really, I hope for some reason, because it's their new documentary arm that maybe they make an exception, But in any event, that's what's going to happen. It'll premiere in England on the 15th, I believe it is. I'm looking at my. Yeah. There were some rumors going around last week that it would be the 12th, but it's not. It's the 15th, unless there's another screening. But it did say in the premiere it would be an all-star premiere on the 15th in England, and then it's going to premiere on several dates up through that week. I think the 22nd is the last one, and the 22nd is the last one in Japan. So but it's going to premiere pretty much all that week, and it's going to have a new live material. I think people were really excited about the fact that they had asked for a lot of fan footage, and I think I'm not going to comment on that because we've been talking about that. But one thing I did hear from somebody who has seen an advanced version is that Pete Best and Jimmy Nicol are not in it at all, which is interesting.
So that means no footage from a certain part of the 1964 tour, for one thing. I mean, I don't think there wasn't footage of them with Pete Best except for that little Floral Hall 1962 thing. But yeah, Jimmy Nicol is in. There is quite a lot of footage that has him in it from Holland and even Australia. Australia too.
First couple of dates, yeah.
Right, and that Holland footage is some of the best footage there is, and so is the Australia footage is good too, and that's really a shame if that's true.
As a matter of fact, actually, in the trailer, I believe they show a clip of Australia, not them playing, but where they're sort of in, I guess, the mayor's residence or something, and there's a huge throng of people outside. So Jimmy Nicol is probably in there microscopically. We didn't get to see him. But,
okay. But yeah, that's interesting. But it's gonna be fun. It's gonna be on the big screen. I mean, the thing that's interesting to me is, number one, it's only going to be around 90 minutes, which leaves out a whole lot of history, and it's certainly not going to be. There's not going to be a lot of full concerts in there, which, maybe at some point down the road, when they release it on DVD, the expanded version will be otherwise. And so that's interesting.
Most documentaries are that way.
Yeah.
And in fact, you don't really get complete songs very often. So.
Right. Yeah.
Right, and which it's going to be interesting exactly how they went with this thing. The fact that Ron Howard is involved, an Oscar winner, somebody who knows what he's doing, I'm curious to see where he took this and what they did, how they handled it. That's going to be what's going to be interesting. Apparently there is some new footage, and apparently the quality is going to be astounding. But
you can see that bit of the Manchester footage really I've never seen it look like that. I mean,
yes.
That is just incredible. So that will be nice to see. Although I believe it is synced to the studio recording of Twist and Shout.
Yeah, I noticed that. Yeah. That's interesting. Yeah, it's the fact that it's going to be almost immediately debuting on Hulu is interesting, because I remember saying a few months back that I thought possibly they might go with Netflix, as a possible, and bypass a theater run. So it's interesting that they're just going to have basically a few of these, I guess what you might call theater events. Mm-hmm. And then the next day, the day after the first of those events, it'll be immediately shown on Hulu. And I don't know. It's possible that if one has Hulu Plus, I'm not sure of this because I don't have either Hulu or Hulu Plus at this point, but I think on Hulu Plus, they may not go with commercials. I'm not sure.
No, that's how it works, because we have Hulu.
Okay.
The basic Hulu comes with commercials. If you want it without commercials, you have to pay $4 more a month.
Right, and that's Hulu Plus.
Well, no, it's called Hulu Plus. I'm not sure why it's why. It's just another. It's a without commercials option. We've had it for over a year, and when we first got it, you didn't have that option, and then they added it in about 6 months ago. So I don't know what and it's really I mean, I was thinking that they would run the film in the theater for a week or two before they threw it on Hulu. I was really surprised when they said it was going to be the next day. I mean,
I don't know. It kind of strikes me as the kind of film that really, because since it is just a 90-minute documentary, it doesn't really seem to be the kind of film that would run in mainstream theaters.
No, I disagree. Michael Moore's, to use Michael Moore as an example, Michael Moore's documentaries run for a week at least. And
well, that's a little different because he's got a specific, kind of political agenda in mind. This is really just, it's really just a piece of nostalgia, but
and
it doesn't seem like the kind of thing that would run for a week or two in movie theaters. So that's why it seems to make more sense to have these, just these sort of event premieres, and then have it immediately go to, a streaming service and then on demand and whatever.
Maybe they felt the demand wasn't there, but I would have said it, I would have thought at least a week. That would have been my decision. Ken?
How often do you ever see a documentary on any rock band in a movie theater?
Exactly.
And, obviously this is just for a limited run, limited theaters. And I wouldn't expect it to run more than a week. But, yeah, it's a little bit surprising the day after to be on Hulu. But I would think by making it available on Hulu, that's going to drum up demand for it on DVD and Blu-ray. You'd also have to hope that maybe there'll be more material on the DVD and Blu-ray that won't be on Hulu and in the theaters.
And Hulu isn't in terms of the streaming services, Netflix is the biggest one. Why they didn't go? That's another question. Why they didn't go with Netflix?
Right.
I mean, we have. I don't know if you guys have Netflix and Hulu. We have both of them, and I like Netflix much better than Hulu. Much better. So I don't know.
Could be just whatever. However much, as they say, cashish was was offered to Apple.
Well, they also Hulu's also rolling this out as their first part of their new documentary arm, and I mean that may have had something to do with it, but still, Netflix is the better service. I mean, even you wouldn't want to see it on Amazon Prime because Amazon Prime really isn't as classy. Although, I mean, Hulu has some great stuff. I'm not gonna, they have Dick Cavett, they have a lot of old TV shows. They have some really good stuff there. There's no question. But I'm just surprised that they went with Hulu over Netflix. I think Netflix would have made a lot more sense. I mean, Netflix has the Wrecking Crew right now. They have, they have Frida, good old Frida. So I don't know.
Hulu has Seinfeld, right? So it's probably because of that.
So does somebody. Yeah.
So, guys,
Go ahead.
one of the things that we had originally heard was, this was originally pitched as a documentary that would show us lots of material from the touring years, and now it looks more like, we're going to see, from what we can see from the trailer, it's going to be Paul telling us that they were all friends and stuff that most of us may have known, stuff like that. And so people who've been complaining about it on the internet have been saying, it looks like sort of a rehash of Anthology. And from what people who've been close to the project have said various places very guardedly, the project really did change over the time it's been in the process, that it was going to be mostly a music film, and now it's kind of a documentary with lots of music, but still a documentary with lots of talking too. So what do you feel about that?
It sounds like, certainly from your description, it sounds like the same thing happened with this film with Ron Howard that happened with Marty Scorsese and Living in the Material World.
Interesting.
No, I don't think so.
Because they're, people, one of the biggest complaints that people have had about that film was its incompleteness.
Right.
The fact that that it did turn out to be a lot more in the way of kind of a Greek chorus of talking heads, that kind of thing, much like the Anthology, than a really music intensive film. And it appears that that they're that again the principals at Apple may have had a role in changing, the direction of actually both films.
Actually, I wouldn't compare those two at all. Living in the Material World, I think, what they covered well and in detail. But I really think that, while nobody will admit it, they had a deadline to meet. And because of that, once you got to the 74 George tour, and then it cut to the Traveling Wilburys, it's like, it shows right there that I really think that, probably to meet the demands of the deadline, they didn't cover all the time in between. But what they did cover, they covered well. I would reserve judgment on this Beatles film until we see it. But,
sure.
It is always the tendency with Apple to mainstream everything. And just like, we talked about Pure McCartney, which to me is for the casual fan, I think that they are thinking about that too, and probably the Beatles, Apple, Paul, Ringo, the wives, probably think that if all you do is put in unreleased film footage, it's really only going to appeal to the hardcore fan. So they're probably mixing a lot of stuff that we've seen already, probably a lot of stuff that's in the anthology, with some unreleased stuff. It's a balance of the two. I hope there's a decent balance, so that will be the deciding factor as to whether or not, I really like it.
Well, the question really is what they had to work with. I mean, I mean, we all know that they had put out a call for fan footage and unreleased footage, and we don't know exactly what they had gotten. And I think if they had gotten enough really good footage and had used it, I think it would have appealed to both mainstream and hardcore. And again, we can't. You're right. We can't judge this until we've seen it. And I know that some people on Facebook have been doing that all day today, based on a 50-second trailer, which is really kind of silly. But it's hard to say, exactly where they've gone with this and how, if they've done a poor job or what. I mean, like I said, Ron Howard is somebody who knows what he's doing. And so I think that's one of the reasons why they gave it to him. As far as Living in the Material World goes, I thought that was great. As far as I really didn't expect a music intensive portrait of George, that music intensive. I figured it was going to be kind of there was going to be a lot of words, because it was supposed to be more of a spiritual portrait of George more than anything else. So I didn't really have any issue, a whole lot of issue with Living in the Material World at all. I mean, I will agree with what Ken said about the way they cut, the editing there and how it was kind of bumpy. But I mean, I still liked it. I thought it was good. I thought they did a good job. What's interesting is how long that is and how short this is. So I don't know. That's weird.
Yeah.
Living in the Material World, to me, spent way too much time on George's Beatle years, and it would have been much more fascinating to explore so much that we may not know about his solo period. But, it's so obvious once you jump from Dark Horse, the tour, to the Traveling Wilburys, there's all that time in between. And in fact, to even go to the Traveling Wilburys without even mentioning Cloud 9 was pretty ridiculous, because, Jeff Lynne was the start of all that. Jeff Lynne's success with Cloud 9 leading to the Traveling Wilburys. I mean, it's just they must have had time constraints. And when you're dealing with a documentary on someone who's done so much in his lifetime, it's impossible to cover all of it. But if you are given as much time as you need to do it right, it could have been done right. But what they did cover, they did well up through 74. And then it's just that huge hole in between.
I mean, there might also, with the obvious exception of Cloud 9, which did produce a number of videos and interviews and things, there might not have been all that much footage from between 1974 and 1987 that could have run into that as a problem, because he kind of stopped doing the normal promotional stuff for a while.
Right.
He would just put out an album, not tell anybody, and then do the next one maybe.
There's still stuff you can find, whether it's performances, Saturday Night Live, interviews.
Yeah, that's true.
Interviews with people who were involved with that documentary. Those interviews really helped to make that documentary. And it gave you a full explanation of the many sides of George Harrison. He was a very complex person, and I think it really succeeded in that way.
With the Ron Howard film, what I've always wondered all this time is that, how much really good quality new material could there be? Because we're talking about 5 decades ago, and the technology of that time is not what it is now. That any any film, any private film that would have been done would have been just 8mm film that fans would have shot at the concerts. And after a while, there's only so much of that can be really interesting. So that may account for the fact that the film is only an hour and a half long. That there may
there's a few things. I mean, first of all, there is actual professional footage that has not been widely seen. I've seen a little bit of it, and it's astonishing quality. Things from, say, Germany in 1966 that have never been bootlegged even. And with the fan footage, I mean, what they've done is they have the technology to sort of smooth that footage out, make it run at a consistent speed, and dub sound onto it, and so it may not be as bad as we imagine it, having gotten in trades over the years with bits of 8mm footage. It looks awful. You don't want to see it.
Sure.
But when it's processed and, using current technology, you can actually make something of it. But, I mean, there's another way of looking at this. I mean, we're talking about how casual fans may not care about all the unreleased stuff. And the fact is, the casual fans don't know what's been released and what hasn't been released. And there are, just the things that we know that have been traveling around. There's the full 1963 Swedish show. There's Shea. There's the Paris 1965 show, which is fantastic.
Yes.
There's footage from there's lots of there's the two Budokan shows. There's lots of footage. News footage from all over the place where they were allowed to shoot at least one song or so. There's the Hollywood Bowl where there is footage from every single song they played, sometimes not complete songs, but there's something from every song they played. There's Australia, which was broadcast and is around in fantastic quality. So if you're a casual fan, if you really are just a casual fan, you probably haven't seen most of this stuff. So, I mean, there's plenty to work with from that point of view if you're talking about casual fans. And if you're a casual fan and they throw in something that hasn't been released, you definitely haven't seen that. So, I don't see that distinction is necessarily that important. I mean, anything that a hardcore fan would like. I mean, unless we're not talking about hardcore fans that will want to see any badly processed piece of junk. We're talking about wanting to see really good, fresh footage that we haven't seen. And I would think that would appeal to casual fans too, because they don't know what the choices are.
Well, unless you talk to Paul or Ringo or the powers that be, you're not going to know what their thought process is on any project that they put out, whether they're thinking casual or hardcore. So,
yeah.
But it's always been my opinion that they never cared about the hardcore fans. So,
no, they don't. But what I'm saying is that you could do something that the hardcore fans would love, that the casual fans would love too. From the reports that have filtered out of there, a little warily, or that the powers, as you say, kind of decided that normal people who aren't hardcore fans, I guess, really don't want to see a whole stream of Beatles concert performances, and I kind of wonder what the hell they're thinking. I mean, that was what the project was. That was the whole idea of the project.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Anyway. I mean, right. I mean, well, but what's the alternative then? More and more of this fan footage?
Well, I mean, look, they could even give us extremely high quality footage of the stuff that we have, like we're going to see with the Manchester footage, or
sure.
We know what they have of Shea, and and some of this professional footage that hasn't leaked out, that someone got their hands on and kept hoarded over the years, and a few collectors have, and some of them I know have given it to Apple. So there is that, but yeah. Anyway,
I guess it's it's a matter of trying to strike a balance between having a again, a music-intensive film and a documentary which really tells the story of what those live years were all about.
Yeah. I mean, and that's, we don't even know. We have no idea what the interviews are like, but there's also the question of, if they're going to tell us about the live years, are they going to really tell us about the live years? Because, I mean, the one thing I liked about Bob Spitz's book was that it really captured the intense boredom that they felt while being captured, basically, kept in a hotel room, not able to do having to be at these parties where they're sort of locking themselves in a room and just hanging out. And, I can understand that. I mean, that might be what it really was like, not the glamorous stuff that we imagine. And I kind of doubt that that's the story they'll want to tell.
Yeah, I doubt that very much. Yeah.
Yeah. So, yeah. Well, we'll report further when we finally get to see this in September. And anything else to say about it, or shall we move on to the next on the list?
I just hope that at some point the concerts that we've mentioned that we know exist, Shea Stadium, Washington Coliseum, Japan, those should come out in their entirety as separate releases.
They really should.
To me, like you were saying, Alan, I don't really see this big blur between the casual and the hardcore where these releases are concerned. Because if you're a new fan, if you're a teenager just getting into the Beatles and you're buying their catalog, are you really going to be bored watching the Shea Stadium concert in its entirety?
Yeah, no way.
I don't really see how that's really thought of as hardcore. So, but like I said, who knows what their thought process is? Unless we get to ask them, or somebody asks them, we won't know, because this applies to every project that ever comes out on them.
Yeah. Right. And of course, if you ask them about the Washington Coliseum, they can technically, they can say, hey, it's out. Because it is available on iTunes, but you have to buy the whole, the stereo, I guess either the stereo or the mono box, or the digital version of the stereo and mono box to get the Washington Coliseum show.
Well, that should come out. That should just come out on DVD. Period.
Yes, absolutely.
It really ought to. Yeah, I mean that's a fantastic show, and it's in fantastic quality. And,
yes. Yeah.
That should be top of their list.
It's breathtaking. When I did see it, when I streamed it, I just couldn't believe how bright it was and crisp it was. And even if I've seen it 100 times before that, to see it this way, your eyes are just glued.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yep. So moving on, we come to what is really, unfortunately, becoming an almost weekly feature. If we played music on the show, you would hear strains of Barbara's Adagio sort of, creeping up. And that is, we have two more Beatles world-related deaths. Henry McCullough, first lead guitarist in Wings, and Chip Smoman, who worked briefly with Ringo on an album that was never released. And so Ken is our, I guess, resident absolute Wings fanatic. I guess maybe Al qualifies for that too.
Nah.
What do you have any thoughts on Henry and his contributions to Wings?
Well, yeah. I mean, I love all the different lineups of Wings through the years, and I think if you really studied them, you can probably pick out the styles and be able to differentiate between Henry and Jimmy McCullough and Lawrence Juber as lead guitarists if you want to. But
sure.
It's always brought up the lead guitar solo in My Love, which was made up on the spot and was just done spontaneously. And every now and then you come across a lead guitar solo in a song that's so much a part of the song that you can't even imagine hearing it another way. And what he brought to My Love was just that. It was just, it's just something that happened on the spot, just like that, as Paul has said. So it was something magical. And it's kind of like if you think about a lead guitar solo like what George Harrison did in Something. I mean, I can't hear anybody else do a solo differently and think of it the same way. What George Harrison brought to that song and that solo really made that song even more special. So I think what Henry did on that song was the same thing, and enough so that Paul has brought that up many times in interviews. But the fact that he was there at the very beginning when the group was formed, although he wasn't there for Wildlife,
right?
He came along. Well, the first release really was "Give Ireland Back to the Irish," the single. So
right.
He was on the 3 singles of 1972 with "Mary Had a Little Lamb," for which he played mandolin. And he was on High, 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 and then Red Rose Speedway, and Live and Let Die. And as a matter of fact, I should also just take this moment to say that I did an interview with Henry, which you can actually listen to on my website on the homepage, and he talks about his time with Wings, and when he left the group, for which he said he had a big argument with Paul, although he wouldn't go into detail about it. But Henry and Denny Sywell left at the same time, right before Paul and Linda and Denny went to Lagos, Nigeria. Really bad timing on their part, because Band on the Run became the most successful album of Paul's career, Wings' career, And, when Henry looked back at his time with Paul, with me, he was telling me his frustration in dealing with Paul because, when he was with them, Paul had very definite ideas of how he wanted his songs to sound, and he wouldn't let you to stray from that. And even though Henry came up with that solo on My Love, which Paul has praised time and time again, even after that, he was still pretty much the same way. So, when you want to learn about the history of Wings and was it really a band, and I've been fortunate enough now to interview Henry, Denny Sywell, Denny Lane, Lawrence Juber, and Steve Holley, you get different perspectives from all of them.
Right.
I wish I could have interviewed Joe English, who is still with us, but, he's part of a religious sect these days, and he's hard to get a hold of, and he doesn't really want to talk about those days anyway. Yeah. So unless Paul talks about the Wings days in detail, which he never really does, you won't really know, what it was like for everyone in the band. Everyone has their own take of whether or not there was a lot of contributions from all the members. Denny Sywell had told me in an interview that he thought that it was very much a band effort. According to Henry, it wasn't. So, you hear from everybody. Lawrence Juber, on the other hand, was thought that Paul was very fair to him. Yeah. Paul was someone who, I just wanted to say, if Paul had a definite idea of how he wanted a song to sound, and Lawrence thought of something else, and he brought it to Paul, and Paul liked it, he would go with it. So maybe he was more rigid in the early days of Wings.
Well,
so I don't know.
Henry's problem was that once Paul settled on a way a song goes, and including the solo, is that it had to be played the same every night. And Henry was apparently a sort of more off-the-cuff kind of guy, and his solo on night 2 might not be the same as the solo on night 1, and Paul didn't like that. He wanted that kind of consistency of every night play the same notes.
Right. Which he pretty much still does.
Right. Yeah, he does. You can see that when you read about this being one of Henry's problems, and I spoke to Denny Sywell as well, and he pretty much confirmed that Henry was a more organic player, is the term he uses, and that was one of the issues. I mean, there were other issues too with that version of Wings, which is that basically Paul did want it to be a band, and as you say, Denny Sywell talks about it being a band. He talks about how they all made contributions. They all, Paul listened to them. They had a say in lots of things. But on the other hand, he did have them on salary, and it was kind of not what they originally thought they were getting into. And some of the financial frustrations sort of boiled over for Henry at the same time as the musical frustrations, and he just quit. With Denny Sywell, I think, he had argued with Paul that, couldn't we put off going to Lagos for a month? Lagos, and get another guitarist, break him in, and then go make that album. And Paul kept saying, no, we're going to do it the way we did Ram. We're just going to multi-track and overdub, and that'll be fine. And and then too, the combination of the financial frustrations, and in this case, this was the musical frustration for him, is sort of why he quit. He quit a few weeks after Henry McCullough, actually. But it was a really interesting lineup of Wings because it was the first lineup, and it was, they were here was Paul trying to get a band together for the first time since the Beatles, and and Henry was a real interesting player, apparently a bit of a brawler, but that's he was a very important part of why that early version of Wings was so distinctive. So, Al?
As a matter of fact, yesterday I heard Andre Gardner play the instrumental track. Actually, it was really just Henry's solo on High, High, High. Just his, isolated guitar parts. And he was a very, I guess for that time, what you would call a hot guitarist.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe not in the league of an Alvin Lee or, certainly a Clapton or a Hendrix, but certainly one of those, those guitarists who really could, improvise and really, really add a lot to a particular track.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And in fact, right before he joined Wings, he was in Joe Cocker's Grease Band.
Yes.
Right.
And he even played on stage at Woodstock.
Right.
That's right.
Band, so.
Right. He also was on the original version of Jesus Christ Superstar.
Yes, that's true.
I also interviewed Henry, and the one thing that came away from that was how nice a guy he was. He was Ken I suspect probably agree. He was an incredibly nice guy. He really, really was. In fact, I remember getting some comments after I wrote up my interview, and some people had questions about what I had written, and they had another question for him, and they wanted to know if I would go back and ask him, and I did, and he answered, and that was really, that's not something that musicians will generally do, but he did it, and he was in England when I talked to him by phone in England, and he was just an incredibly nice guy.
And one other thing I want to bring up, having interviewed both Henry and Denny Seiwell, is that I really got a sense that, apart from the fact that, yes, they were in a band with someone of the stature of Paul McCartney, this really was a family affair. And they were really close during that 2-year period when they were all together, being on the road a lot, spending a lot of time at the farm in Scotland. So it wasn't just a band. It was very much like a family. And I think that certainly, when I spoke to Denny and to Henry, it was also, there was a bit of sadness there because they missed that feeling of family and unity and closeness that they had, spending so much time every day together.
There's a great clip on YouTube of Henry and Denny playing together at the fest that is worth looking at. But also the comments that came out after Henry passed from both Denny and Paul. Paul actually made reference to My Love, which, as far as I'm concerned, that's pretty unusual for him to do that, and he actually did it. And I think that's worth noting right there, that he had a lot. In fact, he actually. Henry told me that he, and you guys probably remember hearing about this, is that he acknowledged him from the audience in I believe it was Scotland when he played Edinburgh.
Yes, yes, you're right.
And that, that's not something that Paul does. He doesn't do that, and so he respected Henry a lot. He really did, and so that was really cool to hear that.
A couple of other things. When Henry was at the Fest for Beatle Fans in 2012, he was there in part to promote a new CD at the time,
right.
Shabby Road, which he recorded with Danny Seiwell, and it's all Beatle covers. So it's a really good album. And also, he actually had an album on Dark Horse Records.
Right.
That's right. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. And
mind your own business.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And he also actually, when I interviewed him, it was to promote his own CD called Unfinished Business. Yeah. So, but yeah, I remember the Shabby Road one because I got that from Denny Sywell. And it's actually a very nice album. So
Steve,
yes, sir.
what can you tell us about Chips Moman?
Not a whole lot, other than the fact that Moman, as I recall, because I did not write about Moman's passing. Moman worked with Ringo on some sessions that did not get released, and I believe they leaked out, and they weren't met with a lot of good comments. I think that was a bad period for Ringo.
Yeah, that was pretty much the end of his sort of drinking period. And
Yeah.
It's never been clear whether his dissatisfaction was with Moman's production or his own contributions. I asked him about him once, and he kind of didn't even want to talk about it.
I believe I heard some of that stuff, and it wasn't very good.
It was. But,
do you have it?
I have some of it. There was a bootleg that came out years ago called Lost and Found,
right,
and it was half songs from the album that Ringo made with Chips Moman, and it's not the whole album. It's about 5 songs, and then the other half is all different mixes of Cloud 9, George Harrison stuff. But the songs that he recorded with Chips, he covered "I Can Help," the Billy Swan song, which I wanted to bring this up to you guys when I heard about Chips Moman passing, but many years back, before the Chips Moman sessions with Ringo, somebody said to me, "Did you ever think that I Can Help sounds like Ringo singing?" And I never thought about it all that much, but if you listen, it does sound a bit Ringo-ish, that song.
It might have been, you know what? It may have been in a conversation that you and I and Tom Frangione had, possibly on one of the guest shots we did on your show on DHA.
It's possible. Yeah.
I do recall us talking about it, during that time.
But
and
with Ringo's penchant for country music, and that song was not only a #1 pop hit, but a #1 country hit.
Right.
Billy Swan. It was something I could just hear him do, and I've heard the recording of it. It's not that great. He also covered "You Better Move On," the Arthur Alexander song, which the Stones covered. And there's a song called "Hard Times," which is not the same one that Ringo did on "Bad Boy." And there's even on the bootleg, there's some of the Court conversation.
Right.
And I have read online that originally Ringo planned on recording 3 albums with Chips. Yeah. So, that fell apart. I guess, like you said, Alan, we don't know if it's because Ringo wasn't happy with his performance or with Chips' production. But, from what I've heard, what's been bootlegged, it's not that great.
Right.
It really isn't. So once he cleaned up his act, everything changed. From It Takes Time on, he was,
Yeah, I have a feeling that the court case might have sort of colored his view of those sessions, and not wanting to sort of revisit that time in his life may have colored his view of the sessions. And what we heard on the bootleg is obviously not finished, and who knows what the finished thing would have been. But yeah, I mean, the idea of an unreleased Ringo album, I'm not sure if he actually finish the album, or was it just...
I think it, sure. It was kind of fell apart.
Yeah.
Because of the fact that he was at that time, like you say, he was really at just about the bottom of his period of substance abuse. It wasn't that long before he and Barbara went into rehab. Exactly. And talking about Chips Moman, it's not not Beatles connected, but he did a lot of great work in the 60s. Early on, he was very much involved with the early years of Stax, and he was very involved with the Memphis and Nashville R&B community during the mid 60s, and perhaps greatest of all, he was the producer of those incredible sessions that Elvis Presley did in Memphis in the early weeks of 1969, in the afterglow of the 68 comeback TV special that produced one of my all-time favorite albums by anybody from Elvis in Memphis, and also the follow-up album, and in fact those sessions produced Elvis's last #1 record.
Right.
Suspicious Minds.
Yeah.
And also on that album was In the Ghetto.
Yes, absolutely.
And Kentucky Rain.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Yep.
Yeah.
And also, since I just want to say for anyone that follows me on Facebook, one of my favorite singers ever is B.J. Thomas.
Yes.
And Chips Moman worked with him and produced Hooked on a Feeling. As well as I Just Can't Help Believin', and Hey Won't You Play Another Somebody Done Somebody Wrong song, which he co-wrote. So he did a lot of great work, and he founded American Sound Studios in Memphis.
Yes. Right.
So
I have another couple of titles from those Moment sessions. He did Some Kind of Wonderful. I don't know if I can imagine Ringo doing that. Beat Patrol, Ain't That a Shame, and Shooby Dooby Doo Dah Day. Oh, and Whiskey and Soda.
Right.
It's funny, Chip's Moment. I mean, if you're focused solely on the Beatles, you sort of just know about those sessions that were failures. But Chip's Moment was a major guy, and it's in a way kind of a shame that they never were able to make that happen. I mean, it was a great idea at some point. Mm-hmm. And, sometimes chemistry doesn't work, and sometimes there are other things, but, that we'll probably never hear any of those songs in an official version, because Ringo seems not to want to even think about them, and probably can't play.
Right. Right.
So we have another thing from Steve, which is his report on the Tony Sheridan sessions and new documents that have turned up that sort of rewrite what we knew about those sessions, at least contractually. So
Thorsten Knobloch sent
a German author who specializes in
Beatle research, sent me the information that the contract that Sheridan, the contracts that we thought the Beatles had with Tony Sheridan were not as we thought they were, and in fact, he said that there were two songs, and I got to look at it now because this is an extremely long article. But there were two songs that they recorded that they were not paid for, and somebody asked or somebody suggested online, what about Tony? What about Pete Best? And I saw for a fact that Knobloch actually told Rogue Best about this, so they know, they do know, but. I don't know if it's going to mean a whole lot of, it's not going to mean a whole lot of money, but it's interesting that this information has come out.
It brings up some other, little sideline details, like, if Thorsten is correct, and it looks from reading his piece like he is, and they weren't contracted to Polydor at the time they made those discs, they were just session men, then, I mean, one of the things he points out is that the implications for Epstein having to get them out of that contract so they can record for EMI sort of change. But basically they were signing something that they couldn't read. It was in German. And so they really didn't know what they were signing. And
they were also not 21.
That's right.
Yeah. So that was the other thing.
So the contract, anything they signed wouldn't have been valid. If I remember it correctly, I mean, he was saying that they subsequently signed a contract with Polydor or Camford, I think Polydor, that was after they recorded with Tony Sheridan. That what they have as documentation of the Tony Sheridan sessions is really just a receipt for being paid as session men.
Right.
And it's really, it's really kind of weird. I mean, just about history and documents and stuff. At the time, they were handed these things and everybody knew what they were. Now, 60 years later or more, we look at these documents and we say, okay, what were these? What does this mean? What is this about?
Yeah.
What were the circumstances? And it's kind of funny because it's not that long ago. It's not like the, reign of Henry III or something.
Mm-hmm.
So,
although in the pop culture world, it's actually a lifetime ago.
That's true.
Because imagine that happening with any group now.
Yeah.
Right. So.
Yes, does Kanye sign German contracts that he can't read?
Yes.
There we go.
Okay, so that was the Tony Sheridan item. There was also the business of we I think just want to mention that Love is out there streaming.
The Beatles
released Love. The Beatles Love, within the past week was just released for streaming with, I believe, the 2 tracks that were iTunes exclusives when it came out. So
how do you guys feel about that? About that album? I actually like it.
Yeah. I've never had a problem with it at all. In fact, I thought that sonically it's fabulous, and I had no problem with the various quote unquote mashups that were done of certain songs. I thought the combinations were done extremely well by Giles Martin and whatever input Sir George had. They were just fabulous.
Yeah. The funny thing is, I interviewed Giles at the time, and Giles and George Martin were both saying, the hardcore fans are going to be upset at this. And the funny thing is that the hardcore fans were already doing their own mashups. There's this Beatles remixers group, you may know, that put out like 8 discs worth of Beatles mashups, some of which are great, and and in fact, when I went to the interview, I said, no, in fact, the hardcore guys are not upset about it. Here's a disc of I chose some of the ones I like best and put them on a disc for him, and handed it to him. My feeling at the time was that I kind of was against the whole Love show idea. It seemed to me that at the time when the Beatles had not yet put out the remastered albums, and there was always, of course, more unreleased stuff to put out, that what they were focusing on was a site-specific show in Las Vegas, and, who cares? And so I had actually refused to go out there and have a look at it when I was supposed to be writing about it for the Times. I said, no, I'm just going to write an opinion piece. And the opinion piece is like, why are you wasting your time on this when you've got all this other stuff to do? And they said, well, if Giles is in New York, and would you be willing to meet him in a recording studio and he'll have his hard drive with him so that, he can play you the music from the show? And I said, yeah, absolutely. I'm not going to say no to that, right? So I went to a studio in Times Square, and Giles had his hard drive, and he played the mixes on the studio surround system. And, oh, man, they sounded incredible. I mean, more incredible than they sound on the disc because, this is like high definition right off the sound drive. I mean, on something, Ken talks about the guitar solo. You could hear the pick on the strings. It just was so incredible. And at one point after I wrote my piece, my editor said, yeah, this is really good, and the description of the music is good, but can you describe it any more, what your feeling about it was any more fully? And I said, yeah, sure. It was the best time I've had while fully clothed. And she said, I'm not going to do that. So she didn't. But really, it was like that. It was just an incredible experience listening to that stuff in the studio. Naturally, I tried to persuade Giles that he should put, out more of these sort of unedited tapes. But did he listen to me? Not really.
Did you try and sneak a recording of them while you were sitting there?
No, that wouldn't have worked, I don't think. I actually would have. I was trying to figure out a way to copy the hard drive, but
Okay.
no way you could do that. Really, I wasn't really prepared. But
Okay.
yeah.
Well, I've always enjoyed it. I mean, I don't
Mm-hmm.
go to it that regularly, but I just noticed the talent that it takes to mix songs together that work well, and you got to have an ear for that. I've
Yep.
heard a lot of mashups that sound like crap. Just throwing
Yeah.
any two songs together or three songs together where they just don't work. And
Yeah.
I'm sure that there's a lot of Beatles songs you could do that with together that won't work, but these do. And I especially love the one that used what you're doing with the word. It just seemed to flow. And it's not easy to do that. To have a mind to know what songs blend well together. That's the art of doing this.
Right.
So, I don't know if overall I look at this more as a novelty, because this is not the way the Beatles themselves envisioned the song, but
Yeah.
it's just more a producer's, dream job of mixing things together and coming up with something entirely new and fresh and a different
Yeah.
way of hearing it. So, I enjoy it from that perspective. I
Yeah.
don't think I could ever listen to it on a regular basis like I would Beatles music or solo music,
Yeah.
That Within You, Without You,
Yes.
Tomorrow
Tomorrow
Never
Never
Knows
Knows.
is
Yeah, that was-
absolutely astounding. That is just, if nothing else on that album gets you, that has to. That
Yeah.
has to.
Well, the only other one that would really get you is the demo of While My Guitar Gently Weeps with the
Right.
George Martin orchestration. That's a chiller. Let's put it that
Well,
way.
when you see it live in the show, if you don't have tears in your eyes,
Yeah.
because we did, and that part is just, oh God, it gives you goosebumps just to think about it. It's incredible.
So Ken, this week you saw both Ringo and James McCartney in concert. Can you give us a wrap up of those two performances?
Oh, yeah. Well, the Ringo show was like the other show that I saw in Portchester at the Capitol Theater. The one that I just saw was in Staten Island at the St. George's Theater, which I understand, by the way, one of my listeners got to see Help when it premiered there in 1965. So that theater's been around for a long time. But the thing that I loved about the show in Staten Island, first of all, there was not any empty seats that I saw anywhere. It was packed there, and it seemed like the crowd was much more into it, especially on the songs that jammed, the Santana songs and the Toto songs. So I really, feed off of that when I see the audience really into it, much more so, I think, than the show in Portchester. But I do love seeing the guest appearances. Kazim Sultan came on at the end. He played acoustic guitar and sang on With Little Help from My Friends. And also Billy Amendola came on stage too. And for those of you that don't know either Billy or Kazim. Kazim, by the way, Todd Rundgren fans know who he is because he's worked with Todd for many years on his solo albums, and he was one of the members of Utopia as well. He's a great musician all around. He just played acoustic guitar on this. And Billy Amendola has been around since the 70s. He was in a funk band called Mantis, and they had a few dance hits, and he's been a session drummer, and he's an editor for Modern Drummer. And he got to go on stage With a Little Help from My Friends too and play tambourine and sing along. I'm always happy when someone that I know gets to go on stage and join Ringo. It's like, this is the highlight of their lives for some of these people. The brilliant thing about ending the show with a song like With a Little Help from My Friends is you can invite anybody on. You don't have to rehearse the song. Everybody can sing along with it. And, most people who are musicians that play an instrument can probably play the chords anyway. So, yeah, but it's always an enjoyable show, and for me, as much as I love seeing the performance, I love seeing the audience reaction, especially people that some of them are going there for the first time seeing Ringo and the All-Stars. So I really love seeing their reaction and how much they really enjoy it. James McCartney, I've seen now 3 times in concert. Just saw him in Hamden, Connecticut, to an audience of about 30 people in a very small club. And I thought that he was really great. The only thing is that it was him alone. Most of the time he played an electric guitar plugged into an amp, and that was it. And he played songs from his new album called The Blackberry Train. I really like the album more and more as I'm listening to it. And James is a very good musician, and I've seen him play guitar, piano, but most of all, I'm impressed not only with his songwriting, but with his singing. He's got a dynamite voice, a powerful voice, and he can sing in a high register too. And I think the songs really sound great alone, but at this point, whenever I've seen James, it's been with him alone. And I would like to get a full band treatment. I could say one thing about James as I could about the other Beatles sons that I admire so much, is that they're not living off their name. James McCartney probably, if he asked his father, could open for him on tour. But he's going this route instead. He's playing small clubs, he's learning the ropes, and I am impressed with the music most of all, because I think he has a lot of potential. And a lot of this stuff I can easily hear on the radio, on the AAA radio, that format. And you can definitely tell, certainly from his new album, The Blackberry Train, very influenced by Nirvana, has a very raw 90s sound, very edgy, but melodic, kind of like Nirvana. So I definitely get that feeling when I listen to the new album, and I'm impressed with him as a performer. So we'd like to see him expand and have a full band, though.
Yeah, I mean, the stuff on the new album suggests that, a band would be in order.
Yeah, definitely.
He and McCartney played a festival I believe in San Francisco, and they played on separate days, and they did not play with each other. So they are not. That would have been an opportunity for him to cash in a lot on his dad's name, and he did not. So
he doesn't do that at all.
Okay. Okay, so we also have on this week's list of things to talk about the anniversary of one of the great, most rubbishy releases ever to come out related to the Beatles. And which of you wants to take that one?
I guess I'll take it, because I was the one who came up with this little nugget. When I do my morning almanac-y posts that I put on Twitter and Facebook, I happened to come up with the nugget that it was this week 35 years ago that Stars on 45 became the number one record in the U.S., and I immediately thought of Ken, because Ken is the opposite, the opposite Mikey, Mikey from the Life cereal, let's give it to Mikey, he hates everything. Well, Ken likes everything. His taste.
That's really not true.
Well, your tastes are. Let's put it this way, and I mean this in a good way. Your tastes are much more, shall we say, liberal than a lot of us who have particular biases against particular musical genres like disco.
And that would be me, for instance.
Yes, and me too. And in fact, I hadn't heard Stars on 45 in a very long time until I posted it this morning, and I learned all over again why I hated that record. But
so 35 years and time couldn't fly fast enough.
Yeah.
Well, I happen to really like that record a lot.
I just threw in a
laugh all you want, but it went to number one, so evidently I'm not alone in this world.
Oh no, absolutely not.
True.
Yeah. I like it too. I just threw in a couple of notes there. I guess you guys missed it. We were all talking. I just threw that in just for fun, so that we'd all laugh a little bit. But I love Stars on 45. I always have loved it. So
there you go.
I'm a fan. I'm definitely a fan.
Now the thing is, I really think that record was well executed for what its intention was. And you're dealing with a time when medleys were a craze. It was a fad for a while. And those songs, those particular Beatles songs with a disco beat, really just they blended together extremely well. And the way to do that effectively, and it's much easier to do this, is to have the same beat in the background, as opposed to taking the Beatles recordings that could be at separate tempos, different tempos, and they may not mesh together as well. In fact, one of our Facebook friends sent me a link to something just like that, using the same songs that Stars on 45 did, but using the Beatles recordings, and it worked somewhat, but it didn't flow nearly as well. But the thing also that I like to keep in mind when something like that comes out is that anytime there's anything that's related to the Beatles that does well, I think it benefits the Beatles too. Because a lot of young people heard those songs and probably thought, what's this song, No Reply? I like this. Where can I find this? It could have led to young people investigating the Beatles catalog. So I feel that way whenever somebody covers a Beatles song in particular, where fans want to investigate the original recording. But I just think that, that was a time when the medleys were the craze. And I will say, and I hate to always make comparisons, but when the Beatles movie medley came out, I hated it. I completely hated it because as someone who's probably tougher on himself, more critical of himself than anyone that you ever know, when I first heard the Beatles movie medley, I was in college, I was studying communications and radio, I was doing production work, I was doing a lot of editing. And even at that early stage, I could have done a better job doing a movie medley on the Beatles than Capitol Records did. So I much rather prefer here Stars on 45 than the Beatles movie medley. There were a whole bunch of other medleys that came out at that time, the Beach Boys, Supremes, Creedence. It was just,
Hooked
the
on
fad of that time. Yeah.
Hooked on Classics.
Right.
Yeah. Alan's, I'm sure, one of Alan's all-time favorite.
Oh yeah, right. Yeah.
But I think that you're giving them a little too much credit, because at the time when those things came out, there really wasn't the urge of trying to get people into the Beatles catalog. It was really more of a commercial thing. I mean, Stars on 45 also did an ABBA tribute. I mean, do you want me to play a little of that?
No.
No, thank you.
But I mean,
I'm not saying that Stars on 45 did this so that it would increase interest in the Beatles. I'm just saying that was a byproduct of it. They just wanted to have a hit record. That's all they wanted to do. And they were successful at it. So it exposed a lot of young people who may not have known the Beatles songs to these songs first.
I thought it was. I think it was completely commercial. A commercial enterprise, nothing more to sell records, and they did it, and they did a nice job, and they made you're
not getting the point here.
Well,
I'm not saying they did this so that it could help Beatle records. I'm just saying that the nature of the fact that it was a huge hit probably led some young people to investigate the Beatles music, and that's a good thing. Doesn't matter how they get to the music, as long as they get there.
I think you're comparing then and now, and that was a different era. It was a different time, a lot different time.
And I think, I think what he's saying is that if they listened to that record and their mind hadn't been completely numbed by the stupid disco beat, they might have had a thought, and that thought might have been, what's one of those tunes? Let's Go. The original is, but there were so many things sort of militating against that, because the record itself was so never.
It represented that kind of producer-driven, generic, disco dreck, the kind of cynicism that produced Frank Sinatra doing a disco version of Night and Day, that produced Ethel Merman doing a disco version of There's No Business Like Show Business.
Oh, you have to hear that. That is, I have CD. I have that CD.
That stuff is brutal. I mean, that stuff should be played for terrorism prisoners. I mean, that was that's the problem. That's probably the biggest problem that I had with most disco. I mean, the good stuff, the Donna Summer records, the Niles Rodgers, Bernard Edwards productions, things like that, the Village People. Those were great. I
never liked the Village People myself. But.
Yeah, but they were great pop.
They were novelty.
They were great pop. They were great pop records.
How about the Beach Boys going disco? Remember that?
Well, that is probably in that same vein of
right.
Why do this?
Yeah.
But so much of what else was out there were basically just these producers cranking out this crapola to which was it was made to be disposable, and most of it was disposable.
Mm-hmm. No, yeah.
Like I've said many times, there's no way I'm ever going to say anything to change the way you feel about this. I just think that as a pop record, it worked for the way that it was executed. It was a fun record, nothing more, not some great artistic statement here, but as a medley, these songs were strung together well, and I applaud them for it. And evidently, enough people liked it to make it number one.
This is true.
So there you go.
Yeah. So there is apparently one other anniversary that only Ken is aware of, but we're all probably going to say, "Oh yeah," when he tells us. So Ken,
you're all aware of it, and actually we're a few weeks late on it. But I just want to take on something because just recently was the 50th anniversary of the single of Paperback Writer coming out.
Oh, okay.
So what I wanted to ask the three of you is, whenever you read about Paperback Writer now, they make this, very big deal about the fact that there was more bass presence coming from Paul on the record. And, the Beatles, from everything that I read, they certainly listened to a lot of American records, and they heard what was on R&B records and Motown, and they heard there was more bass, so they wanted more bass. Mm-hmm. So what I wanted to know, since the three of you are somewhat older than me, when the record first came out...
Watch it.
When that record first came out and you heard it on the radio, did you automatically think, wow, listen to that bass? Was it that noticeable at that time?
No,
I didn't.
Absolutely not.
I said listen to that echo.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's true. But
the song I always said listen to that bass was getting better, because I used to sit there and play air bass to him doing that when he used to stride down the neck of the guitar, because I loved the way he played that, the do I love that. I thought that was great, but no, not Paperback Writer, not at all.
No, because especially if you heard it on being from New York on WABC or WMCA, the sound wasn't good enough that you'd be listening for the bass playing.
Right.
It was just.
Maybe when we got the single home,
Yeah.
But I don't remember being especially taken by it. But and it's hard to tell because we've heard it so much more recently. And it was one of the issues in the one mixes. The mono versus stereo, and then the one mix that sort of took the mono characteristics, which was had a lot of the bass, or I think the stereo actually had the bass too much. Wasn't that the problem?
I think that's it. Yeah.
Yeah. And it was more integrated in the one mix.
Right.
But yeah, I mean, it's an incredible bass line. It comes spilling right from the top down. But the main thing I remember was that intro, that sort of choral intro they do, and then the echo at the end of it. I mean, that was sort of a big effect. And the other thing I remember about it was the granny glasses when they performed it on the Ed Sullivan Show. The next day, every single one of us went to school and found a candy store that sold granny glasses and walked around in granny glasses the rest of the summer,
Yeah.
Or until they broke.
And also the chip in Paul's teeth.
Right.
Yeah.
No, but when you do read about Paperback Writer now, they always bring that up, about the bass sound. How they wanted more of a bass presence. So I thought the three of you being exposed to it when it came out and hearing it on the radio, I just wanted to know how you felt when you heard it. To me, I hear more bass in Rain than I do in Paperback.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So, just wanted to get you guys your takes on this.
So, well, that was we had quite a list of things to get through, and I think we got through them all, and we could probably still be talking about any one of them. But thanks, guys, and I guess we should talk about how to get in touch with us, which is on Twitter @Things We Said Fab.
Yay! You got it.
Can, yeah. Well, it's somebody's sloppy handwriter. You can email us at thingswesaidtoday.radioshow@gmail.com. We love hearing from you. We often respond. If you have ideas for things that you'd like us to cover, please feel free to let us know. There's millions of topics out there, and you may be thinking of some of them we haven't thought of. And otherwise, getting in touch with everyone individually. For me, you can just get me on Facebook under Alan Kozin or Alan Kozin Remixed. Steve?
BeatlesExaminer@gmail.com. I'm on Facebook under my own name, and I have a Beatles news group called Beatles News and Commentary. We also have a group for the show called There's actually two groups. There's one for the show and one for the Fab 4 radio broadcast, but either one, you're welcome to join, and we will talk about the show there.
Okay, and Al?
On Facebook, Al Sussman. On Twitter, @ASUSS49, or through Beatlefan Magazine at www.beatlefan.com.
And last but not least, Ken, what are you giving away this week?
The remastered Stars on 45 album from 1981.
Ooh, what kind of questions do I have to answer to
with the full 4-minute version?
Yes.
Is this on Blu-ray?
But actually, I am giving away Pure McCartney on my website, and that's at kenmichaelsradio.com. And like I said before, if you would like to check out my interview with Henry McCullough, it's on the home page. If you scroll all the way down, it's right underneath, ironically, an interview with Denny Sywell and Peter Asher right there. You can also email me at everylittlething@att.net, and my Facebook page is right there under Ken Michaels. There's a photo of me with Todd Rundgren. So, again, the website's kenmichaelsradio.com.
And so for Ken, Al, and Steve, and Things We Said Today, I'm Alan Kozin, and we'll see you next time.